And good evening, ladies and gents. Good day, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this extra stream. It's going to be about the neo-reactionary movement, and also we might get on to things like Evola's riding the tiger a bit and what have you later on. Now, before we start, most people will have heard that His Royal Highness Prince Philip died, and I certainly have nothing against Prince Philip, and he fought very bravely in the Royal Navy in World War II. So we're going to play this little musical tribute before we start. Okay, I think that was the aircraft carriers HMS Eagle and HMS Victorious, if I'm not mistaken, when they were based out in the Far East. And in those days, that would have been the late 1960s, I suspect. The Royal Navy had 5 operational aircraft carriers. There we go. All right, gents, just to introduce my guests. We've got the Right Honourable Limbu, we've got Sojo, and we've got Royal Oak. And we're going to be talking about the NRx movement, neo-reactionaries, mention small bug, that kind of stuff. And then, as I said, we may get on to things like Evola's riding the tiger and what have you a bit later on. So I think we'll start off with Sojo and just give some general thoughts.
Sorry. Okay, so general thoughts about NRx. Well, I don't really like your characterization of it because I'm sure you'll lay out what your opinion is in a minute. But I mean, we've spoken in private before. You've made comments about it, but you seem to reduce it to this idea of just like abandoning politics. And I think there's I'm not going to claim to be an expert on NRX, but I think that there is a lot more to it than just that. So for you to kind of distill it down into something as crude and as basic as that, I don't think does it justice.
Okay.
So I suppose that's the first thing that I would open with. And the other thing is that, like as Royal Oak was saying in the green room before we went live, it's not really an ideology per se. It's more of a description of the way that power works. From my interpretation of it, anyway. And like I say, I don't pretend to be a scholar of the subject, but I've always viewed it that way. That it was an explanation of how power works, but it wasn't an ideology per se, in the same way that like liberalism would be, or say fascism would be. So it's a bit of a funny one because it doesn't. It's just, like, as I say, it's just a sort of systematic engineer's view and description of the way that power works, which are also sort of basically heavily on de Juvenel. but it's not a prescriptive sort of way of living and way of running a society, I suppose. So that it's I don't think that you can't really draw comparisons with NRx and sort of like liberalism, really.
Hmm. Okay. Limbo.
Well, NRX. I mean, if you look at it in a more of a theorist stamp, I mean, I can agree with Sojo. It's not really ideology per se, but it's more of it's just way of life. Just looking at it as a reaction. But overall, I haven't read much of your Moldbugs and your other Nick Lands, so. But I have a basic understanding of most neo-reactionary theories and ideas, and some of it good, some of them are bad. But yeah, we'll just wait and see, and we'll discuss it later on.
Rollo.
Yeah, I mean, I said earlier it's like a framework or an analysis, but and thinking about that further, you could argue like liberalism, both sort of liberalism and neo-reactionary like sort of thought, sort of both sort of kind of sort of analyze problems and sort of almost sort of come up with solutions. I think it's fair to say there's like a general neo-reactionary sort of way of thinking, sort of like at least online, like all the NRx people seem to sort of like follow the same sort of line on things like the ultra traditionalist kind of thing, or vaguely in that way. But in terms of, I mean, it's again, it's an analysis that has, I think, some positive parts of it. As I think I said earlier, like the NRX in terms of what it was to begin with, right, was just like a load of programmers. I think Land was a philosopher. I don't think he was a programmer, but a load of like philosophers, or not philosophers, computer programmers coming up with sort of like an analysis of the world that was sort of in line with things like game theory analysis. And I think, as you brought up, the Juvenal as well. And I think online it's very, very different. It's sort of just like Shradcaths and people like distributists and things like that. Like in terms of them, I have no problem with them. But I think a lot of things Land said are not really very much in line with them. On some things, I don't think Yarvin was religious either. What was the other thing I was going to say? It keeps happening on streams. Oh no, what was it I was going to say? I've forgotten. Someone else speak now.
Well, I would say that I like the distributist. I've like followed this channel for years now, and I'm certainly not a trad calf. But I do agree with you. There seems to be quite a lot of American NRX guys who are more or less trad Catholics, or occasionally another Christian religion. I think the cathedral as a concept of a way of looking at power is very useful. I mean, obviously, that's why we've got Canterbury Cathedral as the thumbnail for this stream, by the way, in case anyone hadn't worked it out. But I'm less in agreement with this whole idea of like walking away from politics. And I know Sojo is saying that it's more than that, and he's certainly going to have the chance to explain that in a minute. But what I see a lot of the NRX crowd doing online is saying, yeah, we just got to walk away. There's no point in even voting, and voting actually helps the globo homo and all this kind of stuff, which I think that entirely depends who you vote for myself, but there we go. So yeah, that's my kind of view on it. I mean, I've read a lot of Mencius Bob, like a lot. I wouldn't say I've read everything he'd written, but I've read a lot of his stuff, like his blogs and all this, including the earlier one from several years ago. He's very well read. He's very glib. He's very he's quite annoying when he's interviewed because he ums and ahs an awful lot, almost as much as I do. So there's that. So yeah, Sojo, what do you think are the important things about NRX that I'm missing, like aside from walking away from like politics as it is at the moment?
Well, that's a very hard question to say, because other than what you've just mentioned about you not liking the idea of basically dropping out of the current political system, which I think Moldbug put into a single article, one of many. And admittedly, I mean, I've not read it. I've not read the article. I actually find Moldbug to be very hard to read, and if I'm being honest, a bit of a bore. Is it just the guy waffles on and on? But you know, to say that, and also to say that he represents the entirety of NRx thought. I mean, I suppose you could make that argument. I just want to make it clear that I don't identify as being like NRx. I'm not for it or against it. This is just my interpretation of it. But like in terms of what else it's got going for it, when I first engaged with the material, or really not so much the primary material, because as I mentioned, I found it very hard to go through the Moldbug. The initial canon of Moldbug, which is sort of spread over a number of years, going back to 2013 all the way up to 2016, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
It's everything's disjointed. It's very hard to sort of piece together. I kind of just want somebody to make a sort of a dummy's guide to NRx. That would be basically a really good thing to understand what the hell they're talking about. But you know, as I say, I mean, I think the one thing that I got from it that was useful was basically using it as an analysis of power, and how power sort of manifests itself within the system.
Yeah, I mean, I've got no problem with that.
So I'm saying it's purely descriptive in its usefulness, in that it can provide an explanation. But you know, at this point, who cares about the whys? People want, you know, not just a prognosis. You just don't want the diagnosis. You want the prognosis, right? What is the course of action that needs to be taken, and how, given the set of goals that we have, how is it that we get what we want? I think that's what a lot of people are looking for now, not just endless analysis of the mess that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
So in many ways, in many ways, I actually find it's not particularly useful, because it just, again, you can get trapped in this kind of academic, textbook, theoretical view of the world, rather than just living your own life and getting on with things.
Yeah, no, listen, I'm pretty much in agreement with you. I was going to say, one of the other things that we do see NRx people talking about is producing parallel institutions and so on. I mean, I don't think that's a bad aim, but I think it's a very hard one to actually fulfill. And also from NRx people in North America, like the USA, I also hear a lot of people talking about kind of going off grid and this sort of thing, which I think is, like, in British terms, is just totally impractical for the most part.
Well, I mean, going on from what Sojo said, I mean, I don't know. It's a little overly intellectual in that. I mean, like you brought up riding the tiger earlier. That's something similar that a lot of people have begun to pick up. Like, and I don't claim to be like the most experienced person in the world, right? But I mean, it's all a little sheltered, I think, like, because you can't really like clear pill yourself through like your community being destroyed, can you? Or you can't like, oh, I'm just riding the tiger whilst my everything's burning up around me. It's almost like a sort of elitist view, isn't it? I suppose
it also seems to be very long term. I mean, you'll get guys turning around and saying things like, "Oh, yeah, we may have to sit this out for 50 years or 100 years," or sometimes people will say 500 years or 1,000 years, which, like, to me, is just, it's like sitting at the end of the Roman Empire and saying, "Don't worry, boys, it will be all right in 1,000 years."
Well, I mean. More to the point, I mean, like, I don't know. I think an NRx as well is something that's like quite often misunderstood, especially accelerationism. That's misunderstood constantly. But I mean, are you over intellectualizing? I mean, I think so, yeah. But I mean, I don't, at the end of the day, I don't think they're right either. I don't think like we're in a position where right-wing politics is like completely gone. Completely. I mean, the country's lurched pretty hard to the right on some issues. Polling's still pretty well on our side on a lot of things. So
No.
I don't feel the situation is hopeless at this point. But I don't know. Other people may feel differently. But yeah.
Limbo, you got any takes on that stuff?
No, not really.
Because my view is that Britain's, everything I've read, Britain is going to be a minority white nation some point in the 2060s, unless either mass immigration policy or birth rates change, which I don't see any sign of at the moment, sadly. So, you know, the whole idea that you can sit around for 50 years, let alone 150 or 1,000, is to me like it's just not practical politics.
Yeah, and I'll continue on. Sorry, I'm speaking a bit too much here, but
No,
I think
go for it.
I watched the academic. I don't usually watch his streams. I've watched a couple of his recently, just because it's sort of on the sort of topic that I follow quite a bit. But I think that there was a guy. I think it was his name was Panama Hat, wasn't it?
Yes.
Who was on his stream, and he said, well, like, and he was arguing with, I think, Yiz the Eunuch, someone who I'm not, to be honest, particularly fond of, but I think they said, what was it? They said, I forgot now. It was like, oh well, your flag doesn't mean the same thing it meant in 1707, right? And that's the thing is, at the end of the day, like, that flag represents like my people, doesn't it? Right? I mean, I think I know a lot of people like critical of like, oh, patriotism and jingoism. Even the Colette crowd and people like Morgoth are critical of it. But at the end of the day, like, what makes the world go round other than jingoism and like a tie to, like, I don't know, your common people, right? I mean, that's what builds a society.
I would just say, Harmony Craig in the chat, yes, you are right. I did hear Mulbo's wife died. Apparently it was some sort of hereditary disease, sadly.
Really?
And she was only about 50, I believe. Yeah.
That's terrible.
I think she'd been ill. Yeah, I think she'd been ill for some time.
Yeah.
So yeah, very sad, that one. But I would say, I mean, the other thing I was going to say about the NRx is that an awful lot of these American NRx guys were like fully on the Trump train until very recently, which is like kind of not quite what you see the NRx crowd saying they should do, you know?
Well, I mean, sorry, carry on, Sergio.
I was just to make a brief comment on that, but my interpretation of that was actually the reverse, that running up to the election in November, the whole NRx crowd, which I suppose you can just sort of, you know, distill down to academic Cajun, they were all basically saying, yeah, we're done with politics, we're clear-pilled. And then something kind of happened in the run-up to the election, during the election, where they flipped and they said, oh no, actually we can't just give up like this. So it's actually, my interpretation of that is actually the inverse, Duke, that they began quote unquote clear-pilled, and then towards the end of it they were actually on board the Trump train. I don't know where they are now, because I don't.
Now they're riding the tiger.
Right. Okay. Well, we should get into that, because I have read that book.
Yeah, no, I do want to get into it later on. I know Limbo's got some stuff to talk about on that. We may, by the way, get another guest in a little while, a chap called the Albion, although I don't know what he's doing, because I've sent him the link, but I haven't heard back from him yet. But he wanted to come on earlier. So if anyone knows the Albion who's on my Discord, then feel free to contact him. So yeah, I do. I think you're right, Sergio. They were kind of clear-pilled, and then they fully went on board with the Trump train, and now, of course, they're once more NRX and riding the tiger, which is AA's latest fad. I have to call it a fad, because AA goes through these fads. I mean, I like AA. I watch most of his streams, and I think he's entertaining, but I don't think he's always totally logical about what he's doing. And I do think, as people were talking about before we started, when we were talking in private, I do think you're going to get some anti-patriot, anti-jingo stuff coming up in AA's streams. And I don't think that's necessarily going to be helpful. But it is it's the position of some of these NRx people in the US for sure.
That's interesting, because I've actually sort of been drifting that route myself. But like I say, I'm completely disengaged from all of these content creators now. So that's interesting that from what you say, actually I'm on the same trajectory as they are, but I'm not even sort of connected with the zeitgeist, the cultural zeitgeist of the online right at the minute. So that's weird.
Well, I only watch a few, and most of the people I watch are probably vaguely NRX-ish, apart from Don the Pleb. And like Don the Pleb produces a lot of streams, so I don't watch all of his streams. I only watch some because I've got to do other things in my life. I think that Royal Oak is correct, and that patriotism is kind of necessary for nationalism. And I find when people try and do nationalism without any patriotism, a la Colette or even people like Morgoth, I find it falls a bit flat. For me, at least, it does.
But what would you define as being the distinction between nationalism and patriotism? Are they really just synonymous terms?
I wouldn't say
normal people. I would.
use them
interchangeably.
Yeah, to Joe Public, they probably are, but then they're actually not. They do have slightly different meanings. I mean, patriotism to me is more love of one's country, whereas nationalism is more intellectual, if you like.
If I'm being honest, I would just use the two terms interchangeably. That's why I wanted to ask.
Yeah, you could, but they're not. They don't actually mean the same thing. I suspect.
Again.
I suspect that's what AA is going to be talking about, actually, to some degree.
But because when I look at someone like Colette, he's basically making critiques of the British state and trying to detach the state from the people. And actually, I mean, I actually do have a great deal of sympathy with that, which is that I think, it's I actually do think in the UK that a lot of nationalism and patriotic feeling is actually bound up in the state as opposed to the country, the people.
Mm-hmm.
That, I mean, even if I think about my brother, and he's like, his view would be, well, my passport says that I'm British and therefore that's what I am. And that's basically a kind of state-led, state-imposed identity on an individual, whereas it's not organic, coming out of something that is just sort of all around you and that you are immersed in. So if you would sort of compare like Britain with Ireland, Ireland's always had a kind of weak government, and I think their conception of themselves and who they are and what it means to be an Irish nationalist isn't so much bundled up in the state. Whereas I think so much of the past glories of Britain are actually bundled up in what the government has been a part of, that it's very easy to basically confuse the two, confusing the state and the people with what you have pride in. And it's quite convoluted, but I think there's...
And it's made harder. It's made harder in Britain's case, of course, because of the four constituent nations that make up the UK.
But also so much of what we're proud of is basically what the state has done. The state has organised the people to do monumental things. Like, we wouldn't have an empire without the state, right?
I think,
but culture is organic, that comes out of the people. So there is, I mean, there's like World War II. Everything that we're proud of and what makes us who we are is very much bound up and wrapped up within the apparatus of the state.
Yeah, I would say, look, the one area where I have a certain amount of agreement with Morgoth, for example, is I think far too much importance is put on World War II by British nationalists. I know why it happens, and I know that the cathedral, as Mulbud would say, encourages it, but I don't think that's necessarily that healthy.
I mean, I think Sojo's right in that you can't separate the people from the nation. right? The two things are pretty inseparable in
Yeah.
terms of. I mean, like I don't know, unless you want to sort of like separate, because once you start doing that, I think there was someone who vaguely sort of tried to do it. I can't remember his name, but it's like sort of like this sort of like post-national tribalism, I suppose you could call it, like not really connected, but then you sort of lose the connection to the soil as well. So I don't think it's really. I mean, like I don't know. I think you should just embrace like all the things of the British state. That's my view.
I mean, I like the kind of poetic, green and pleasant land type patriotism, as well as the more aggressive military bands and ships flying the white ensign stuff. You know, I think the green and pleasant land stuff and love for one's local community, particularly if you live in a more attractive part of the UK, is I think that's entirely healthy.
Yeah.
I agree with Anglo-Nile in the chat. A lot of British nationalists only know history from 1939. Far too true. Far too true. And it's something I certainly try and do my best to overcome on my channel. The little bit I can do.
The one thing I'll say, like I like have found, like I don't know, like, you could say it's worrying, or like I don't know. For me, the wrong call is the sort of like collapsitarian worldview that a lot of like NRx people have. Like, I think one from a Christian perspective, I don't think you can be totally collapsitarian, unless I suppose in sort of an astral sense. But and number two, I think it's the wrong call. And I'm reminded of, I think the National Front tried to do a commune in France in the 1980s or something. It went disastrously wrong. And you can see, I think, people like Colette and people like that are trying to do similar things at the moment for that. And I think it's the wrong decision. I think it's a retreat. Which is the wrong call. Looking at polling and looking at other things like that. That's just my view. But
I'm certainly not an accelerationist at all.
No, and I mean, even at the end of the day, like even if you want to say, oh well, we need to ride the tiger until another thing comes about, right? By that time, England's going to be destroyed. You know, England
Yes.
cannot be made.
Yeah.
England cannot. It can't be like made again. You know, not at least not in the same way, right? And if you call yourself a conservative or a nationalist, like.
Yeah, I mean, I call myself a reactionary these days, but not a neo-reactionary. Yeah, I think that if Britain collapses, that's it. Britain's gone. You might be able to make something else, but it won't be Britain.
I don't even think there's going to be a massive like collapse in the sort of Malthusian sense, I suppose, or like in the sort of, I don't know. In the way that people think, oh, there's going to be like this, it's going to be like not collapse, and then boom, there's a collapse. I think, I think, if you look at what's happened in South Africa and, in other countries across the world, right? In Brazil, yeah. I mean,
still function.
Exactly. Yeah, there's not been a. It'll probably just be a silent, a silent, like I don't know, like a falling off a graph, you could say, like a small, the amount of Britishness just declines over time until it gets to near zero. Sorry, carry on, Sojo.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that I think it will be a very gradual decline in living standards, that everything will just become more grotty. It won't be as nice a place to live as it once was. The houses will get smaller. Crime will gradually creep up, but I think it will be a sort of frog being boiled scenario. But I just look at South Africa and think, if you're talking about a situation where less than 10% of the population are white, and yet somehow that society still functions to the point where there's not a mass civil war, then why on earth would there be some kind of collapse, as someone like Gavin Bobby sort of thinks is going to happen? I don't know. There just doesn't seem to be any precedent. There's no sort of any evidence to suggest that would happen.
Well, the precedent is the collapse of the Roman Empire, is the one I see most commonly used.
I
don't think it's a very good one, by the way, but there we go.
Yeah, I mean, the Romans were invaded, weren't they? But anyway, sorry, Karen.
But that was the collapse of the empire. But the towns, the people, the civilizations that made up the empire, they continue to exist just under their own rule, right?
Yeah, but they went down very rapidly, Sojo. I've actually been looking into this a bit recently, not because of the NRx stuff, purely for historical reasons. And there's a good deal of evidence that many of those towns and cities, they collapsed very quickly. after the removal of central Roman power.
I mean, again, more to the point. I mean, I think, you know, going online and telling like a load of people like, oh, there's going to be a collapse, oh, everything's hopeless. I mean, like a lot of like, you know, quite young people, like 17, 16, you know, watching this stuff, and like, and then, you know, are you responsible for what happens after that? Like, you know, people ended up, you know, and if you tell people that things are hopeless, they're not going to do anything, are they? So.
Well,
I mean,
this is certainly one of the
Yeah.
things that NRx people get accused of, for sure, is that they're saying walk away from politics and don't.
and
do
I don't
anything.
even I don't even think it's true, to be honest. At the end of the day, I think I'm not expressing myself here very well, but I mean, I think there's a special place in hell reserved for people that just sell black pills online with no solutions. I mean, why even bother dragging people into that line of thought when you don't? There's no goal at the end of it other than just to black pill people.
Yeah,
Well,
and there's a lot of that about. There's a lot of it about.
Well,
Yeah,
I could be accused of that, but then again, I've never pretended that I'm selling a solution. I'm just a guy who likes to have a chat on the internet. That's all I am. But you could easily tar me with that brush, because I don't offer any white pills. I mean, I don't see any. All I dispense is black pills. I can't help it. That's just my view of the situation.
Well, I mean, I guess you're not like I don't know, massively making loads of videos just full of
I don't
black
make any.
pills. But I say, I mean, there we go. But I mean, just going on a stream and providing a more like, I don't know, negativist worldview. There's perhaps a benefit in. But I think, like, I don't know, like some people's like, oh, I'm just going to red pill everyone, and then just not even think about any of the consequences of me red pilling everyone. Or, you know, telling people, oh, there's going to be a collapse in 10 years, or you know, everything you love is being destroyed, and then just walk away.
I just think one of the reasons I wanted to do this stream is I just think that Britain is in such a different situation to the USA in this regard. Like in the USA, certainly, because it's such an enormous country and has got a relatively huge population. Yes, I could see isolated groups of traditional type people being able to ride out whatever the hell is going to happen. I don't think that is such a practical proposition in a relatively crowded country like the UK, where you can't, you know, go out to the boonies somewhere and set out your own compound and all this kind of stuff. It's almost impossible to do that in the UK.
Yeah, but I think I'm not sure that interpretation of. I'm not sure that interpretation is correct. People are just saying to drop out of mainstream society, basically. But that doesn't mean that you have to go out into the wilderness. That just means, again, picking up on this idea of like this, that when they talk about parallel institutions, which is that you're making a conscious decision to say, no, actually, I won't send my children to this university. I won't purchase a subscription to Netflix. No, I won't consume my news media from the New York Times. Those are choices that you can make while still being, in a physical sense, connected to the civilization, but you're dropping out of the sort of cultural and, well, essentially just the cultural apparatus of the current state. You know, the news, the education system, the culture and entertainment. But again, but you don't have. I don't think you necessarily have to conflate that with sort of being like physically removed out in the wilderness. I think that dropping out can be a sort of spiritual thing, not just a physical thing. To drop out and disappear.
Yeah, I think even that's more difficult in a country like UK, to be honest with you.
But why'd you say that? I mean, I find it very easy. I mean, I haven't owned a TV for like 7, 8 years. So I don't know what the mainstream culture is.
Yeah, okay. Well, I've got a television, but I haven't plugged it in for about 3 years.
Right. So how do you really know what's going on in the world if you're not exposed to the culture? If you don't read the news?
Oh, I do. Like particularly for my regular weekly shows, I make a point of looking at some of the news stations occasionally just for that, in case there's a news topic.
Yeah. So you're going out of your way to find like what is on TV.
No, I'm not. What I'm doing is looking at the major news stories around the world. I don't bother looking at what's on TV. In fact, most of the films and stuff I watch these days are old stuff, to be honest with you.
No, but that's what I mean, is that you're actually going out of your way to find bad news. And I'm saying that actually, if you drop out of this, if you like spiritually drop out of the system, then you can actually live in a world where LGBT actually doesn't invade your life because you don't consciously expose yourself to it.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. I mean, I think, like in our little sphere of the internet, that's not entirely possible either. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Although you as you say, you don't follow anyone now, so that's okay.
I'm not subscribed to anyone.
Yeah, well, I'm subscribed to loads and loads of people. I only watch some of their videos, but I kind of have to be to keep some idea of what's going on. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do my weekly stream, or it wouldn't be very interesting, I don't think. I'm just looking at some of the stuff in the chat. Son of Britain saying South Africa's got water shortages in Cape Town and can't stack food in supermarkets. I would also say that South Africa gets lots and lots of electricity blackouts at the moment. The road system is deteriorating very rapidly. Like there's potholes all over the place on major freeways and so on. So
okay.
Yeah, well, possibly, but there's a little bit. There are rather less people there, and over a much bigger area. But I don't know. I mean, I agree. I don't think that this collapse that people talk about, and I think it started in America. You know, people started saying, "Oh, you know, the American century's over," and all this kind of stuff. And I think even that was an exaggeration, in that it's coming to an end for sure, but it isn't ended yet. Like America is still easily the most powerful military power on earth, and I don't see that changing in the next 10 or 20 years, to be honest with you. Not totally.
No.
After that, yes, it's possible things may happen with China. I happen to think we're going to get in a war with China before then, but anyway. So I think that's where this whole collapse thing started from. People started talking about, oh yeah, the American century's over. And then you had a lot of people talking in the States about states seceding, which I don't think that the American government would allow, quite honestly. I'd be very surprised if they allowed any major state to secede from the Union. I really would be.
Well, you've sort of certainly changed your tune there, because sort of in the run-up to the election, you actually thought that was a possibility.
I did. I thought also that all sorts of things were possibilities in the run-up to the US election, none of which came to pass.
Yeah.
Apart from a bit of rioting on the day when I thought there would be.
Yeah, the phony Capitol siege. I mean.
Yeah, it was a big setup. Yes, it was a big setup. I agree. But yeah, I thought all sorts of things were possible prior to the end of the American election thing, but none of them happened. And that is another reason why, of course, the NRx guys are now so down in the dumps and saying, oh, we just got to walk away, because it was such a huge defeat for the right.
Oh, it was massive. I mean, if you think about it, we are in the 9th of April. It's only been a mere, 3 months, really, since Biden took office. He took office in late January, I think.
Yeah.
And Trump really is but a mere memory now.
Yep.
And
he's been memory holed by the media.
he's been memory holed, and it really is as if he didn't even exist. And it's surprising how quickly everything has gone back to normal.
Well, normal in inverted commas, but yeah, okay.
Yes, I suppose that's right. Yeah.
I mean, I also think that whatever happens with this trial in the US of this chap accused of killing the drug addict robber guy, I strongly suspect we're going to get some more riots in the US after that, one way or another, and I'll be interested to see how they react to those. That's going to be quite interesting. Because I think they might actually be tougher than Trump's lot were, but we'll see. I think he's walked away. He's doing an NRx. Sorry.
No. Sorry, I actually didn't have anything to follow up with on that.
Okay, fair enough. Limbo, you haven't said anything for a bit.
Yeah, I can certainly agree that anything can happen. I mean, especially with the whole the end of century for America, that definitely led to the conclusion, especially with many black pills. But overall, I can generally agree with Royal Oak and Sojo. I mean, most points are, I was going to say they conveyed it in a way which I wouldn't have said. So
Yeah,
props
I mean,
there.
I'm agreeing that the whole cathedral concept is a useful concept. It certainly is. Um, I think building parallel organizations is going to be harder than people think it will be. Um, and I think I see what Soju's saying about merely switching off. In some respects, I've done that for years because I've never been quite of the modern era in that sense, if you know what I mean. Like I've never agreed with modern stuff like that, whether it be tranny story hours or letting kids change their gender at 4 and abortion on demand. I've never really agreed with all of those things. So I've never really been on board with the whole globo homo liberal thing in any case.
Mm.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, the one thing that you can't really escape is the changing demographics. I think that's
Yep.
you can
Yeah.
you can turn off the TV, you can not read the news, but eventually you have to go outside, and it's you can't. That's one thing that you cannot escape.
Well, I was actually going to say, Sojo, when you were talking about things gradually getting worse and that's more and more unpleasant, I was just going to say that's almost exactly what's happening in London and Birmingham right now. So, it's kind of like the whole country going that way.
Yeah.
And it just gradually seeping into more rural areas and smaller towns and villages and so on, which is certainly what they're trying to do if you look at where they're putting migrants and things these days.
Well, I've got a property on sale in the UK at the minute. Now, I would say that 75% of all of the people that have gone to visit it so far for viewing have been foreign. Some of them have been European, but I've had a couple of Chinese names pop up, and Asian names. So yeah, based on the trends in the area that I used to live in, it is the balance of people looking to buy homes there are not British.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I was going to say about the whole NRx thing and walking away from politics is like I believe that walking away from mainstream conservative politics is something we've definitely got to do. We've spoken about this I've spoken about this on my streams several times. And like, I think there are maybe a couple of dozen conservative MPs who are vaguely actually conservative. Probably not many more than that. And overall, supporting Alexander Johnson is not going to do anything. I mean, it might be slightly less worse than supporting Starmer, but that's all. And I think that the important element for whether you describe yourself as a patriot or a nationalist or whatever, I think the important element is to put your votes into a populist or nationalist party, insofar as there are any, which is not very good at the UK at the moment, but rather than supporting the mainstream parties. That would be another difference I'd have with NRx people. Because I notice in America, NRx people say, well, you can't support the Republicans, the traditional right-wing party in America. But they never talk about trying to produce a different party to replace them.
I mean, I think they've got the Constitution Party, but I think going to the point, I don't think in Britain that if there was an alternative, proper traditional anti-establishment party, I don't think it would ever succeed, to be honest. Because of the whole cathedral idea of the tight iron fist of the progressive view. So, and especially first, I mean, I like first past the post system, but I don't think it would ever succeed if all the traditionalists banded up together. I don't think that would work, anyways.
I don't know. I mean, I've been an advocate for ages now. Like all these semi-nationalist and populist parties need to have some sort of a loose alliance, so they at least don't run against each other. You know, because basically, if you're UKIP or your Reform UK or any of these other parties, if you're basically stealing votes from each other. And I think the only way they're ever going to get anywhere is if they have some sort of loose alliance, so that they at least say, well, look, here for Britain's going to run or whatever it might be, and this place, well, UKIP's going to run. And like, you know, if we actually manage to get a few MPs elected, then we'll kind of cooperate loosely when we get into Parliament, maybe.
Well, I'm not sure if this is what you meant. It probably wasn't. But in terms of, I don't know, like, can you really go anywhere, like, in terms of politics, if you're not connected to the mainstream conservative sort of thing?
Well, UKIP did.
Yeah, but they won over a lot of mainstream conservative voters, especially in European elections.
I
mean, they were in touch with what they thought, and I mean, you can't. I mean, the reason UKIP were like semi-successful was because they forced they forced the conservatives to the right on certain issues, right? But by taking their voters and things like that, and it shows you really can't do anything outside the two-party system too much.
But I'm exactly talking about the non-mainstream parties need to get those conservative voters. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't consider myself like that out of line. I think Limbo wouldn't either. Like that out of line with like a lot of people in the mainstream conservative party. At least maybe 60 or 40-50%.
Yeah, I consider myself like more out of line than that for sure.
Well, I mean that's people inside the party, not representatives. But
okay. So you're not talking about MPs.
No, I'm not talking about MPs.
Fair enough. Okay, you're probably correct in that then. But yeah, I am absolutely talking about us getting traditional conservative voters, and also the more red-pilled and socially conservative Labour voters as well, of course.
I honestly think in order for us, if we do want to, the Tories not trying to steal voters, if we are going to start our own party, I think we would need a certain selling point that the Tories wouldn't obviously steal. For example, if you have a Christian traditional solidarity party, I mean,
ending mass immigration would be my number one.
Yeah, that would of course be one, but I think a selling point would be like a different economic view over the economic liberalism, like some sort of corporatist distributism, which obviously the Tories won't cave into. So that would definitely, if that was implemented, that would definitely sway people in. But of course, demographics are going to catch up to us because the Christian vote is falling.
I think you've got to. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by looking at something else. I think you've got to look at what UKIP did and how they did it. And I actually think a big driver for the Brexit vote was mass immigration. To be honest with you, I really do. I think a lot of people voted for Brexit partly as a protest against mass immigration. And partly because they didn't really understand that the mass immigration they were concerned about was mostly actually coming from the British government and not the EU. And by the way, I'm a total supporter of Brexit. I think it was a very good idea. I still support it totally. But I think maybe that ending mass immigration could easily be the central plank of a party that could actually begin to worry the Conservatives. And if not actually partially replace them, it could at least force them to the right in the same way that UKIP forced the referendum on Brexit. I mean, even maybe forcing the Conservatives to hold a referendum on mass immigration, for example, which I think would come as a huge shock to most of the British establishment, or maybe not.
I mean, I don't know how you can defend mass immigration. I mean,
well, the Conservative Party does, but what they do is they pretend it's not them, and we will do something about it, and then we do.
Yeah, that's where I see the flaw in your plan, because the Tories consistently say we're going to cap immigration.
Yeah, and they never do.
I mean, yes, they never do that, but their public position is yes, we want to cap immigration to the tens of thousands, not the hundreds of thousands. So,
Didn't they drop that, Sergio? I'm pretty sure that under Alexander Johnson at the last election, they actually dropped that tens of thousands thing. I mean, Royal Oak may know more than not Royal Oak may know more than me, but I'm pretty sure I remember hearing that they dropped that pledge.
I think
They
they
may have
did.
done. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially with this whole Hong Kong thing, paying over
Yeah,
millions.
yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's
indeed.
over half the cap apparently. So
Yeah. I don't know. Listen, I'm not pretending to have all the answers. Like I'm like Sergio, I'm a bloke talking on the internet, but I do think that is a possible way forward, and it's a long way from abandoning politics.
I think the this idea of we're abandoning politics, it's kind of like, hang on a minute, you're not really abandoning anything. All you ever had and all you still have is a vote. It's not like these folks who are the kind of cultural leaders of this sort of small internet subculture actually tried to do anything in the first place. So
Yeah.
this idea that you're dropping out of something where you only had a vote to begin with is, to me, a bit of a cope and actually kind of a bit of self-flagellation. It's like, really, you as an individual, yeah, you can sway people's opinions to vote a certain way, but that's it. And you yourself, you didn't front a political party. You haven't written any books. You haven't put forth any ideas. You've not been on TV. You're not sort of culturally persuasive in the mainstream. You're just a guy on YouTube. So this idea that you're dropping out of what? You were never in the game to begin with. So I find the idea to be quite a bit of a cope and a bit of a LARP to begin with.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, one person, of course, who did write a book is Brutus. I'm just looking at the chat here, fair play to Brutus. And fair play.
People have been taking the piss, but fair play to the guy. He actually wrote a book.
Yep.
No one else has.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. And I find it hard to believe that people spend so much time slagging off Brutus, who's most certainly not an enemy of the British people.
Yeah, but again, I think it's part because we're in an online subculture, and the banter and giving people shit is part of the territory. There's more to being in this than just talking about politics, but there's the personal rivalries and all that kind of bullshit that goes with it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't. I mean, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I certainly try and stay out of that stuff as much as I can. I've seen it, of course, that it's very, very easy to get into arguments with other people in this same little corner of the internet,
But it's funny, and we're blokes, and that's what blokes do. So I tend not to, don't want to sort of go too hard on people. I mean, I'm guilty of it anyway, so
Yeah. We've all done it on occasion, of course we have. But I tend to try not to, because we've got so many enemies that we don't need to fight amongst ourselves, quite frankly. That's my own view on that. Is fighting amongst ourselves is pretty much a waste of time. We've got so many other people who we do need to fight, one way or another. Obviously, in Minecraft and in a peaceful way.
But again, Duke, it's like, if we do a cost-benefit analysis of how we spend our time here, regardless of whether or not we're fighting, we're shitting on one another online or doing a stream, it's not like us talking about these things on the stream actually achieves anything. We are not moving the dial. There is just a lot of fantasy in this movement. We are literally just people talking on the internet with no influence whatsoever.
Well, especially a tiny little channel like mine, I totally agree. But even a much larger channel like AA, and AA's got 50,000 subs or something these days.
Yeah, 50,000 subs who are all singing from the same hymn sheet anyway.
Yeah, they're already. He's preaching to the converted. Yes, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're not, as a movement, we're not really making inroads into people who are there to be flipped and converted. I think that's what you want to focus on. But
I agree. Yes, I do agree with that, and I hope that we pick some of those people up from time to time. But I'm not sure how you deliberately target them, to be honest with you.
I think it's very hard because, obviously, if you take YouTube in isolation, obviously these channels are definitely throttled and are definitely suppressed by the algorithm. So make no mistake about it. It's very hard to sort of broaden your audience. 'Cause,
Well,
I mean,
I was trying to get this channel onto another platform the other day, where they upload all your YouTube vids, but I can't do it until I get 600 subs. So you have to go and subscribe, people. So anyway, Royal Oak, you haven't said anything for a while. What's
yeah,
your
I
views
mean,
on this?
just going on from that, Sojo, like surely like I don't know, you saying like the online stuff doesn't matter, which is you're correct in a way, but like surely the, I don't know, the ultra NRX riding the tiger take on that would be, it's like separating yourself from the, like I don't know, separating yourself from the mainstream, right? You know, it's as Jesus said, like, you know, you're, what is it, you're of the world, not, no, other way around, you're in the world, not of the world. Yeah. Epic Bible study. Anyway,
yeah, but I mean, again, I'm actually sort of front running what I think will be said on this stream, but I get the impression if you follow the events from the election, there's this hype, there's going to be this sort of Caesar moment, and then it's this sort of complete dejection afterwards, and everybody's scratching their head, wondering what the hell they're going to do next. Is it any surprise that now people are sort of getting whipped up into a frenzy about, you know, riding the tiger and sort of, you know, living among the ruins? This is like group therapy. Oh, how, you know, it's like sort of going from one sort of emotional high to a low, and it's this merry-go-round of content that people are getting sucked into in this subculture. That's what I think this Ride the Tiger thing will be. It's like, oh, we're not going to get what we want. Everything looks terrible. How do we psychologically, you know, survive this terrible outcome? Well, let's read Ride the Tiger because, you know, someone's already been here and documented it for us. That's my sort of like armchair psychological take on what's happening here.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad one either in many respects.
well, you're right in that, like, you know, all this online stuff, like everyone's just citing old things, right? All this stuff has happened before. There's no like original political ideas. It's like music. Like if you like sample like a random piece of music from today, right? It's like sample from this song in the 70s, sample from, you know, there's no original thought really left. I mean, that's why a lot of people liked the NRx, sort of, I think, because it was just sort of like this original thing. And people were like, oh, well, you know, we have all these old tired ideas that are frankly consigned to the dustbin of history.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that occurs to me as an older chap than you guys. Like, I think I'm the oldest person here. In fact, no, I am. One of the things that strikes me is that when I was talking with my teenage and early 20 mates in the British Army in the 1980s, most of us were more right-wing than most of the so-called nationalists that I see these days, you know, and we weren't even described as nationalists at all. I mean, okay, we were a bit because we were in the army, obviously, but, you know, I've just, the younger generations have gone more and more left because of all the propaganda they get in schools and universities and what have you. And maybe some of what we're doing is just trying to counteract that a bit.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I think it's the cult of like egalitarianism, isn't it? It's this idea that everything has to be, you know, equal and I don't know, equal and I guess what's the word I'm looking for here? The same, I suppose.
Yeah, boring and grey.
Yeah,
and you know, almost communistic.
Yeah.
Although that's not right, because it's not. It's more kind of corporate globalism stuff. But yeah, all right. So before we move this on a bit to riding the tiger and what have you, has anyone else got any final thoughts on this stuff? I mean, I don't think we've really come to any conclusions about NRx, except that maybe some people have got the wrong idea of it, others haven't. And as I said, I've always thought that the cathedral itself is a useful concept.
Well, the final thing I say is, I mean, the NRX isn't a front-facing movement. It's designed to be something for like people who want to be like right-wing, I don't know, figures or whatever, just to sort of give them a framework and a bit of a step up. In that way, I think it's harmless. I think, I don't know, a lot of people who pick it up sometimes go down sort of the wrong path of things. But I think Steve Bannon and I think Dominic Cummings as well have been influenced by it. So I think it's a nice.
I liked Cummings, but they got rid of him.
Yeah, well, nah, he was willing to chuck the Northern Irish under the bus, but
Was he? I didn't know that.
he was.
That's disappointing.
But Yeah, I think it's overall. I mean, I think we're talking about two separate things here. I mean, the NRX is like a sort of idea. I see as sort of rather harmless. It's more like some of the NRXs online. There are problems with them, which I think was what you were trying to get to the bottom of. But yeah, in terms of them, I think I've sort of gone over what my criticisms of them would be. But which is the collapsitarianism, which is, I don't know, selling black pills with no thought as to how they'll be interpreted by people. But especially with the accelerationism as well. But yeah, Jake's gone on mute.
But we haven't really talked about accelerationism. Maybe we should say a few words about that, because, like I said, I think it's not a good idea, even if it would work, and I don't think it would.
Well, it's misinterpreted. I mean, Land never said like deliberately try and accelerate things. His take was basically as like things get worse in a society, you'll accelerate towards the end of, you know, the end of that society. He wasn't saying like you need to like do this or do that, whatever. That wasn't his point at all. But yeah, and he wasn't even specifically talking about things of that nature. But
Anybody else got anything to say on that stuff?
No, not me.
Okay, then I'm going to ask Sojo to start this section. And I'm going to ask Sojo to give us, because I know he's read it, to give us his interpretation of riding the tiger.
Okay, I will give you like a real brief rundown.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
A really real brief rundown. But the chapters that really caught my eye were basically the ones on marriage, sex, the family, and then basically suicide at the end. And my take from reading this book was basically that there's no point getting married, there's no point having children because you don't have any control over your children and their destiny, and that the bonds from generation to generation are quote unquote being dissolved by modernity, which he talks about quite a lot, and that really, you know, in order to have any kind of inner freedom, as he put it, in a modern world, you basically just had to sort of live a sort of solitary life. And actually it was the only way for ideas to exist were not necessarily through blood bonds, but by bonds of ideas. So, and then he even made sort of reference to having sons who were not even of your own blood, but like sort of adopted sons, because of this like spiritual nature of the ideas that sort of would be passed forward to other generations. So in many ways, I find it quite funny that they might be reading this book because of those chapters, because it's basically anything but trad. It's basically like MGTOW, and then if you've got the balls to top yourself, that was like my take of the book. Now that is, I mean, those are the parts of the book that sort of really caught my attention the most. And there's more in there when he sort of talks about, you know, existentialism and a Nietzschean sort of worldview in terms of sort of making your way through modernity. But he ultimately rejects all of those. So it's not, I didn't find it a particularly sort of traditional book whatsoever, because it's sort of telling you to do things that are not traditional, sort of basically to just like evaporate to dust.
That's interesting, because certainly from sort of AA's kind of sphere, I'm getting the impression that a lot of these guys think it's some sort of survival guide. You know?
Well, no. Well, that's the funny thing. The book is literally titled "A Survival Manual for the Aristocrat of the Modern World" or something like that. But it's anything but. It's not that. The title of the book is a complete and sort of a great example of sort of false advertising. It's not like a step-by-step guide as to how to survive the modern world. It's literally just a critique of all sorts of things. Why he thinks that the Nietzschean worldview is not sort of up to scratch. His criticisms of the Catholic Church. Why he's very non-traditional in his views on sex. He's not stuffy about sex whatsoever. He's basically like, yeah, if you can get laid in dangerous circumstances, that's really the only place that you're going to have any kind of transcendent possibility by having sex. So it's really. I don't know why sort of traditionalists would read this and think, oh yeah, this is the book for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. What's your take on this, Rollo?
Well, it's quite similar. I mean, a lot of like these. I mean, Evola probably wouldn't have considered himself a traditionalist. He probably would have said he was a futurist. I think in fact he did. The only book I've read from him is Handbook of Right Wing Youth, and I wasn't particularly impressed with it, to be honest. But
yeah, I'm not a big fan of Evola, I must say.
Yeah, Evola. I mean, he's anti-Christian as well. I'm not particularly anti-pagan. Yeah, which is fine. I mean, as long as you're not gay about it. but riding the tiger. What were you saying? I mean, in terms of, I've seen as well. Like it's quite a trend, like among like these sort of kind of spheres, to advocate for like young men to have sex as young as possible for some reason. Like you need to have like loads of sex when you're really young. It's like the complete opposite of traditionalism, isn't it? And
who's advocating that?
Well, I've certainly heard people in Discords, like quite high up people, say that. I've heard
right.
I think they said it on TASOB like 2 weeks ago. The only reason I watched it was because Phil covered it on Northern Nationalist on his channel. Okay. But and they were like, yeah, we need to return back to the 1990s where everyone was like shagging like crazy because it gave people loads of confidence or something, and because
really?
Like
listening to Oasis.
I mean, it's just such a. I mean, like people make fun of the whole return to. People make fun. Oh, shall I wait? I'll just carry on. People make fun of the whole return to tradition thing, but like their view is literally like return to 1990.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. Sorry, Limbu, go on. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, I was just laughing. Yeah.
Okay, so so I mean, what's funny is that there's another section in Ride the Tiger where Evola essentially eviscerates the idea of the 1950s housewife, and and I find this really funny because a lot of people in this movement, right-wing circles, really do idealize the 1950s housewife, and basically his view was that like this is decadent. The woman's got all of these modern appliances. She's basically just a lady of leisure. She has no value. She doesn't have any sort of motherly instincts or anything like that. So his, again, what people in this movement think is traditional is, in the view of Evola, like completely decadent and degenerate. So people think that the 1950s housewife is something that we should get back to. But Evola would and does completely reject that in this book, which is one of his last books as well.
I mean, if I had to pick like one problem with like the whole Fuentes like crowd, is that they just want to return to 1950, like, and I can see why, but like if that happened like through some miracle, you'd basically just get to the same place in 50 or 60 years, and it's not like it was a completely perfect society, was it? I mean, there was large scale problems, like some of the same problems we'd have today, right? Mm-hmm. So if anything, I think it's unambitious, but or not good enough.
This is one thing that really sort of annoys me about right-wing politics and like people who are trad, is that they don't have any ideas of their own. They're not forward-looking. It's always this: let's just go back. Let's go back to an earlier time. Let's wear clothes from another era. Let's live in houses from another era. Where's the vision to build on the greatness of what's come before us and to add our own little bit to our civilization as we progress going forward? That we just don't have that. There's no sort of. Why can't we have a sort of right-wing modernism that is cool and sexy and builds on the greatness that's gone before us? That is completely lacking.
Yeah, definitely.
You could call it Anglo-futurism. Yeah,
Anglo-futurism. It's like Nueva Benidorm in the galaxy. I mean, with Dyson spheres and massive stellar breweries that are sort of out in the galaxy. You just have to dream it and it will be real.
I mean, yeah. I mean, we have the power of like modern technology, don't we? Like, we can build things extremely cheaply now with sort of steel, concrete, and glass, right? We have the sort of potential to like build these enormously great civilizations, don't we? I mean, And I think wanting to return for that reason is just a bit. I mean, and even if we like, you know, like back in the day, people used to die at like 40 of like preventable diseases, right? Even on a, you know, on a metaphysical level, right? It's I don't know. I remain hopeful, but you know, as Spengler said, perhaps optimism is cowardice.
I don't know, guys. I've just fixed my microphone that was playing up a bit. Listening to what Soji was saying, a lot of what you were saying there, mate, sounded very like 1920s Italian fascism, because that was very much a kind of right-wing future movement, looking back on the past but looking into the future too.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, that may be the case, and that actually might be something to be worth looking into, actually, because I've never given that a thought. But that doesn't mean that I'm a fascist. I mean, that just means that I want us as a movement, as right-wing people, to put our own stamp on the landscape, on the culture, in a modern way. We don't necessarily have to go. We don't have to literally go back to the past. But we can be inspired by what the past was, and maybe reinvent it in a new modern way. But you know, we just where's the imagination?
Yeah, there is a poverty of imagination these days. I think that's definitely true. But I also think when people do look at the past, they don't go back far enough. I mean, as you say, a lot of people just look back to the 1990s, and even like the people who have a bit more of a vision are really only looking back to the 1950s. And to get to a more healthy society, I think you'd have to go back, in Britain's case anyway. You'd have to go back really to the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century.
But the thing
1950s.
is, who would want to do that though? Who wants to go back to 1850?
Well, I'm not saying 1850. I'm saying up to maybe around 1900 or maybe even 1910 in many respects.
But Duke, what does that actually mean in reality?
Oh, listen, I mean, I think issues with the franchise and stuff for a start, but I mean, I'm not saying that they're practical issues that are going to get addressed any time in our lifetimes. Like I'm a household voting supporter rather than like one man, one vote. Unless you've served in the armed forces, I think there should be a way to get a vote.
Yeah, but would that really change anything at this point? I mean,
I think
gay men voting for the same shit.
No, because they're still very much a minority. I mean, you know, they've got to.
I didn't mean gay literally. I meant soy losers.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think it would make a difference. I mean, I'd also like to raise the voting age to 25. And as I say, I'm much more a supporter of household suffrage than I am of one man, one vote.
Yeah, but again, I look at these and think to myself, these are chicken and egg problems. Like, how would you get anybody to vote for that?
Oh yeah, no. Listen, as I said, it's not practical politics in the short or even medium term. It's just not. It's not going to happen. You know, even my idea of raising the voting age to 25 and still keeping the same system we have now, I don't think it's going to happen. You know, in fact, the pressure is all on lowering the voting age, not raising it. And I think it's deliberate. It's done deliberately because the people who rule us know damn well they can get away with a lot more with silly 16-year-olds who don't know what the hell they're talking about. You know, I mean, I'm not saying 18-year-olds are that much better. They're not. Yeah, if anyone who's that sort of age in the audience will forgive me.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I was 18, I was not a grown man at all until I was about 25, 26, in terms of the way I thought, and even then, my actual thinking on things like politics, etc. I was probably over 30 before I got it somewhere fairly consistent. So I'm not saying, you know, earlier generations were brilliant and the younger generation's not as good, although I would say the younger generation are more infected with this constant propaganda that we get coming from the MSM and schools and colleges and unis and all this kind of stuff. If that makes any sense.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. I think Sojo's right in that there needs to be more imagination than we show. You know, the idea of going back to the 1990s is just ridiculous because, as I think Will Oak said, if we did that, you know, 50 years afterwards, we'll be back where we are now. It's just no point. You've got to make more fundamental changes than that. And the 1990s were not that great. I mean, as I say, I'm the oldest chap here, and I can assure you the 90s were worse than the 80s in most respects. So, you know, we were already on a downward spiral, and UK's been on a downward spiral certainly since the end of World War II, but actually really since World War One, if you ask me. You know, I think you can trace the time when Britain tipped onto a downward path to 1914, basically, and it's just accelerated from there.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. We've moved away a bit from the riding the tiger stuff, but I do think some of it is cope. People use it as a cope thing.
Sorry, just to I can actually bring this back to Ride the Tiger, because I was the reason why we're talking about going back into the past is because I made the observation that what many people think is traditional in right-wing circles today, in the book Eveler is lamenting as being decadent, i.e. the 1950s housewife. So that's how we got onto that sort of diversion.
And as you said, that's a very MGTOW take. I mean, somebody like Coltrane would absolutely 100% agree with the views you were saying that Evola held on that.
I remember reading those chapters on family, the marriage, and children, and I thought to myself, there's sort of elements of MGTOW here, but it's like a higher brow MGTOW, in the sense that, I mean, you're reading through it, and he's basically saying, this is why you shouldn't have kids, this is why you shouldn't waste your time with women. And it's like, and I sort of look at that and think to myself, well, that's what MGTOWs say, but they're saying it for different reasons. You know, basically, MGTOWs are saying it for like material reasons. Oh, she's giving me shit. She's a real pain in the ass to be around. I'm going to get sort of divorce raped. Whereas Eveler's like, oh, there's not enough challenge here. There's no spiritual meaning in this. So it's like it is like he's gone his own way, but for different reasons, for metaphysical reasons, for reasons outside of the physical realm. Whereas for the MGTOW man, it's purely material, of this world, worldly reasons. You know, money, hassle, for suffering. Oh, the woman's causing me suffering. But whereas for someone like Eveler, there's meaning in suffering.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in Coltrane's case, for example, who's one of the MGTOW guys who I follow, I don't always agree with him by any means, but I follow his content because it's generally pretty intelligent. And he would have totally agreed with Evola in the sense of that modern housewives, because of all their labor-saving devices, etc., actually don't provide value for money. Yeah, that's a point he's made at least once or twice in videos.
Yeah, right, but that's not the reason. That's not the argument that Eveler's making. That Eveler would probably look at that and say, "Oh, that's just a sort of bean counting, miserly view of that situation." He wouldn't give a shit about like the economic cost or its efficiency. His view would be that this is, you know, there's no sort of spiritual value to this exercise.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Go on, you were going to take us back. I mean, I'm all for that. I agree with you. That is where we got off.
No, sorry. That's how we got to.
We
got diverted, talking about going back into the past, because Eveler ultimately made the critique of the 1950s housewife.
And did he come up with any good ideas to get rid of that, or was it just, it's nothing's going to change, kill yourself?
He's the ultimate black pill. And there's all sorts of quotes in there saying that if men of high caliber came about, you know, there wouldn't be anybody, you know, strong enough to follow him. It's all pointless. You know, there's literally no point.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd recommend people to read it, because it's not a particularly long book. It's an easy read. I did enjoy reading it. It's not. It doesn't use sort of flowery, hard language like sort of Nietzsche would do, or Carlyle, who are a real chore to read, in my opinion. But Evola's actually is a nice read, and you can get through probably a chapter a day if you just want to sort of like plod through it. There's maybe 20 chapters. You can get through it in a month, and it'll take you 30 minutes, 45 minutes a day to get through a chapter. So I'd recommend it. I thought it was a good read.
But not exactly a survival guide for modern reactionaries.
Yeah, as I mentioned, as I say, it doesn't actually. There's no guide in there whatsoever.
Yeah. What do you reckon about that, Limbo? I haven't heard from you for a little while.
Oh, I mean, Sojo's point of how the young right essentially wanting to return to the 1950s. I mean, that's pretty bland in itself. It's not. There's no excitement to that. I mean, if you want to be realistic here, we can't return to the 1950s. If some might say we're being too nostalgic, but I think what Sojo said of building something new of value. I mean, I know Roger Scruton says it in his books, and I definitely say a lot of my videos. We need to build something new of value, but what are we going to build? Something new of value which we can sustain, and which we don't have another enlightenment situation where all our institutions disappear and we're nothing essentially. So,
See, I tell you,
on that,
I tell you why I think people. I tell you why I think people say they want to go back to the 1950s. It's because you don't actually have to change very much. The left have to behave in a different way, and women to some degree have to behave in a slightly different way. But you're not really changing many fundamentals. The voting stuff and all that was all where it is now. And I suspect that is one reason you get people saying, oh, let's go back to the 90s or let's go back to the 50s, because you don't actually really have to change anything.
Oh, that's not my take at all. I think that people like the idea of going back to the 1950s is because aesthetically in cinema they've made it really sexy. There's so many films that sort of make me feel nostalgic for that era. The way they're dressed, the way that everything's shot, the sort of the American sort of white picket fence. It's alluring. It's really alluring, and I think that Hollywood do that on purpose.
Yeah.
I don't think people are consciously thinking about it's actually easy to get back there. I think it's been romanticized in popular culture so much that it just looks so appetizing to go back to.
Yeah, but I also think it would be relatively easy to go back there in some respects, if you see what I mean. It's the modern world, but with less leftism.
Yeah, I can see where you come from. Yeah.
Do you see what I'm getting at, Sojo? It's kind of like
what I mean.
Oh,
What's
my head.
really? I think you're right. I mean, what would you have to change to go back to the 1950s? Basically ban pornography, ban gay marriage, make the bring back the censorship board for TV programs, radio and film. Somehow, I mean, I think the hard bit would be to actually bring back the sort of social importance of the church. That is something that you can't just legislate for that.
Yeah, and the family, of course, less divorce and that sort of stuff.
And the family, and then, I mean, what else distinguishes the 1950s from now in terms of
contraceptive pill that would have to go.
That came in the 1964.
Yeah,
right? So,
abortion on demand, same thing, a bit later.
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, there's not many things. There's not
the technology hasn't changed that much really. Like the basic stuff, like for example, jet aircraft are not much faster now than they were in the 1950s.
Yeah, everything now is just more reliable and sort of higher quality
and uglier generally.
And more efficient and therefore uglier. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't have the cars in the 1950s still had character,
Yeah.
And you still had steam trains, which ran more quickly than the trains we have now. But but you're not fundamentally changing very much, and I think that's part of the attraction. I mean, I think you're right about Hollywood deliberately glamorizing it, And I agree with you that, you know, looking back on it from here, it does look quite attractive, you know.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, also like just the way people dress in the films, it's like it just looks good. But I
Yeah.
can't imagine living in a society where people sort of dress up that formally for just like everyday life. Compared
People
to what I
wearing
see now.
hats and so on, you know.
Yeah, people wearing hats, people wearing lovely suits and blazers and stuff like that. I think a lot of people would be embarrassed to wear that. They would feel out of place. It wouldn't feel right for them to be that sort of done up.
I don't know. I've always been a suit wearer, but I will say I was taking a girl out like not that many years ago in Melbourne, and I got refused entry into a pub because I looked too corporate, which I thought was quite amusing by the doorman. He said, "No, you can't come in, mate. You look too corporate." I mean, all right, it might have been because I got a shaven head and I look a bit sort of rough, but actually, there weren't people in there in suits. You know, it's just I've always worn suits pretty much when I'm not just messing around. If I'm going out for the evening, I tend to put a suit on. But you know, but I did that even when I was younger. So you know, or wore a sports jacket or something anyway. But yeah, I mean, like my father was a young fellow in the 1950s, and he certainly made it sound very attractive. I've got to say. I mean, one of the things that he was always telling me was that in London in the 1950s, you could leave a job in the morning, and if you weren't too fussy about what you were going to do, you could get another job in the afternoon. You know, that's obviously pretty attractive compared to the position we're in now.
Yeah, I think going back to what Sojo said, I kind of disagree. I think in terms of like you know how we display ourselves in society, I think there should be higher standards in terms of how people dress in society. Sorry, carry on.
I agree with you on that. I'm just saying that it's my view that I think people in general would actually be quite uncomfortable doing that. I mean, I completely agree that. I mean, I just go out on the streets and there's girls wearing like jogging bottoms and they just look like they rolled out of bed. So yeah, I'm all for having, you know, higher standards. And certainly when I was growing up, like girls really made an effort to look good, but they, like the younger girls today, don't seem to give a shit. It's really quite perplexing, actually.
I tell you what, I also see a lot, Sojo, is at night time, if I'm in the middle of the city for some reason or another, you would see these girls done up to the nines, and they'd be wearing heels, and they couldn't walk in the heels because they hardly ever wore them, and they were rolling down the road like a drunken sailor. And you'd also get the guy with them would have like a t-shirt and a pair of shorts on and a pair of trainers, you know.
Uh-huh.
I didn't get it at all. And like women actually like smartly dressed blokes. If you speak to women, you'll find they like smartly dressed men.
Uh-huh.
And they notice that stuff far more than blokes do. So for any of the younger chaps in the chat who are, you know, thinking that it's hard to get hold of the women and stuff, like women will even notice if you polish your shoes. Trust me.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of on the same wavelength there, but I do think that Sojo is also right, and that Hollywood do deliberately kind of glamorize that stuff. Like they've even tried doing it with the 1970s, which, if you ask me, was one of the worst decades to be. But you know,
Yeah, 60s and 70s.
Yeah, not great. And I think the 60s really, like the first half of the 60s was more like the last bit of the 50s, and it was only the second half of the 60s which was really the 60s we now think of. But I remember I watched a pretty good video by an Australian YouTuber, and he was talking about it was basically a video about a young couple who were getting engaged and they were going to get married, and about how they could get a house and all this. And this dude was just an average dude working in a factory, you know, car factory or an engine factory or something, and which there aren't many left of in Australia anymore. And like, you know, his life was not that difficult to set up. I mean, sure, he had to work hard up to a point, of course, but it was by no means like some huge mountain to climb to get married, have a family, and buy a reasonable house in the suburbs, you know.
It's interesting you say that, because I've had this conversation with my parents, And so my parents were born in the mid 50s, late 50s. I should really know my parents' birthdays. But I mean, I've had this conversation with them before, and they said that, you know, in the late 70s, early 80s, like buying a property, like it wasn't a walk in the park for them.
Yeah, I think it was, to be honest with you, Sojo, as I said, this was an Australian video. And I think property prices, in Australia, you know, because it's got more land, etc., at that time were probably more reasonable than they were in the UK at the same time. So I kind of get where your parents are coming from with that one. But you always had to work. I mean, like my father bought his own house as basically working as a labourer, and he bought his own house in the middle of London. I mean, it wasn't a great house, don't get me wrong. You know, it was a 2-up, 2-down 19th century building. But he bought and paid for it and was able to do so for a very average job. And as I say, my dad's a bit older than your parents. Like my father was born in 1933. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's actually literally as old as my grandparents.
Yeah. Well, I'm 55, mate. You know,
so your dad had you quite late then?
Yeah, he was in his late 20s. Yeah.
Okay.
Late 20s, early 30s. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, he did have me quite late. But was married for quite a long time. But he was married for like 8 years before I was born. So they kind of like they were having fun, if you know what I mean. In kind of like they were going on holidays and doing all that kind of stuff. And I think, to be quite honest with you, it was mainly my mother who wasn't desperate to have kids. And then she had 2 fairly quickly. So, which didn't please her all that much, if I'm really honest about it. But there we go.
My parents had me. My parents had me at 39, and my sister at 41.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
they was their only 2 kids as well. So.
Well, I was like, when my son was born, I was in my 30s. So, you know. But that was finding the right woman to have one with, you know. Because, I mean, I had opportunities to do that beforehand, and I just thought, I don't think so. So, you know.
So that means my grandparents about the same age as Sojo's are, even though he's about 15 years older than me. I think I've only got one left now, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I've got 2 left on it. Yeah, shit.
but what I was trying to say, to try and get us back on course a little bit, was like you've always had to work hard in order to buy your own home and this kind of stuff. There was never like a free pass. It was just that it was perfectly possible to do, and wasn't like nowadays. I hear a lot of young men, particularly if they're not particularly well qualified, they just think it's a mountain to be able to buy their own property, you know.
Yeah, but is that actually true? I don't know.
It's certainly much more expensive than it used to be.
Well, but here's the thing. So you have to take into consideration what the interest payments are and what the capital payments are. So it's true. It certainly is true that house prices have gone up a lot, but actually because interest rates are virtually at 0. Actually, it can be the case that your monthly payments are actually more affordable these days than they were 20, 30 years ago, relative to the income that you have. So it's not always that clear cut that it is hard to get a property. And of course, it depends where in the country we're talking about. If we're talking about London, yes, that's very hard. But then again, I don't understand why a white man would want to live or settle in London anyway.
Well, unless it was for work, I suppose.
Or unless it was for work. But then again, I would say that, you know, you can get much more value for money living in the north of England, which is this kind of Dino box Toryism phenomenon that, you won't know about it, Duke, because you're not on Twitter, but I chat with a couple of people who have sort of noticed this trend of Dino box. I'm afraid you actually probably won't be aware of what it is. I don't know if the other guys know what it is, Dino box.
No,
I've seen it
please
vaguely.
explain. Please explain.
It's like
Go on, go on.
It's like the kind of person that did GCSE PE phenotype, basically, isn't it? So like it's just like the kind of I could get the meme up actually. I'm not sure if I have it saved, but it's basically like this like guy, you know, he's like kind of muscular, you know, he wears like Ralph Lauren, like goes to the gym. He does GCSE PE. He's like, all right, Chandra, I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna go inside. I'm gonna go inside and go watch Love Island in my new build, and I'm gonna have some ready meals for. What is it like? I don't know, like
30-minute meal.
Yeah, Jamie's 30-minute meals for dinner.
Jesus. Oh yeah, it sounds dreadful, but it's okay.
But what was it? I think the phenotype was like deputy head of like deputy head of like strategic marketing.
Yeah. So
like...
in the 4chan meme, the wife is a team leader at a call center, and Dino is like an estate agent, or he sells Barrett homes, right? That's the meme, right? Barrett new build homes, But the idea is that this Dino tourism in the north is where, like, the northerner is in a position to have like an average job, buy his own home, and have this kind of like empty bugman life, as some of my friends on Twitter sort of like to lament. But there is this, so there's this kind of archetype of sort of, it's like really a reiteration of Mondeo Man from like 1997.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
The Tory Dino, like Northern Dino.
Yep, yeah, that one I do remember.
So there are, so there certainly are spots in the UK, even regions of the UK, where like the average man absolutely can just have an average job and buy his own property. It's not, you know, like I say, it depends. It's not impossible. It's impossible for some people. Certainly, like I say, if you live in the southeast or in London, it's going to be very hard. But in the Midlands or Stoke, I mean, I've got a friend Gabe who's going to buy himself a property in Stoke, and he by his own admission just sort of works like a standard job. So there are, it is possible, but I think a lot of people aren't willing to make the sacrifice.
And what I was going to ask you, Sojo, is how difficult would it now be in UK? Because obviously you know this much better than me. How difficult would it be to like get yourself onto the housing market at the bottom end, and then be able to kind of trade up?
Well, again, it really depends where you are and what kind of mortgage deal you can get. So, like, what's the deposit? I mean, if you live in the southeast of England, you want a 2-bedroom apartment. In sort of like the home counties, you're looking at what minimum, like it's in a nice area, like 250, 300 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Well, 10% deposit, you need 30 grand. Then you're going to need, a combined income to borrow the remainder. So probably going to have to be on 50 grand a year minimum. Who's doing that in the southeast?
Yeah, see, this is the difference. You see, like my father bought an old 19th century terraced house in the middle of London, which he knew was going to get compulsorily purchased, like eventually. So it was only worth a certain amount of money, and he was able to buy it from more cheaply because of that. But his plan was that in between that time, he was going to save enough that with the money he made on that house when it was compulsorily purchased, was to buy like a bigger semi-detached place in Maidstone, like in Kent. And he could do that then. I think that would be like almost impossible to do now for somebody who was basically working labouring jobs, Does that make sense?
Yeah. Workington man. I'm just reading through the comments. Workington man, easily available to us. Dino or middle, considering they don't. Yeah, you're right about the kind of phenotype, aren't you? I think most Tory voters now seem to be like sort of tradesmen, like lackeys and I don't know, chippies or people that work in construction and things like that. Most like middle class sort of like office people vote Labour now. It seems to me.
Yeah, Labour, Lib Dem. I mean, why? I just don't. I really don't understand.
Well, it comes back to something we've also talked about in the past, like on these streams, is that for a lot of young men, I think they're far better off learning a trade than they are going to university. Like it will
Yeah,
give
I
them
don't
more
know.
independence. They might earn more money depending on which way their skills and desires lie.
I don't know. I think you've got to be honest, right? If you're a smart person, then you really need to make the best of your smarts, and that means going to the best university you can in the most lucrative degree that you can possibly do. Now, it's a very materialist outlook, but I would say, it certainly doesn't hurt to be poor. Okay, it certainly does not hurt to be. Sorry, what am I saying? It certainly does not hurt to have money, right?
Yeah.
It certainly makes life easier. Okay, so if you've got the smarts, then you should go to university. But if it's like a sort of 50-50, coin flip, whether you go into a trade or you do a degree and you end up working in a call center anyway, then I think people just need to sort of really evaluate what their options are in a more thorough manner. So I don't think they really do.
I always remember some advice one of my girlfriend's fathers gave me, and he was an oil guy. He worked for big oil companies, worked all over the world. And he said to me, and it was too late when he gave me this advice. I was too old to take it, really. But he said the thing to do is to go into a business where salaries are not the major thing they're paying out. So then you tend to get higher salaries because it's not their big deal. And that's the case in some of the oil business, for example. Salaries are not the biggest thing they're paying out.
Oh, Christ, yeah. I mean, if you're a roughneck on you're on an oil rig in the North Sea and you're on, like, was it 3-month shift or rotation or whatever they're on? I mean, those guys are making, 6 figures a year easily. And they may be only working 6 months of the year. But that's tough, hard work. And I wouldn't want to be doing that for too long.
You get the same sort of thing in Australia where guys will go and work in various mines and what have you in Western Australia, and they tend to do like 3 weeks on and 3 weeks off and this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they'll fly in and fly out, and so those guys are making very, very good wages, very good money.
Yeah, same with the oil guy, the guys in Canada working in Alberta in the oil sands. But I mean, the conditions that those guys are working under, I mean, like literally minus 40, 30. I can't remember what it is, Fahrenheit or Celsius.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely very bitterly cold conditions.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you got to be a real man to work that.
And in Australia, it's the opposite. You'll be in the burning sun. Although you probably won't be in the burning sun. Certainly not if you're in a mine. But anyway,
you'll be in a cab of a massive, 1,500 ton.
With air conditioning, with air conditioning.
And a bit of right-wing podcast on in the background.
Quite possibly, yeah. But there is lots of things. I mean, I just think a lot of young men in places like the UK, they need to think about some of these jobs. They also need, I mean, depending on where their skill set lies, obviously, and what they want to do. But also, a guy who can be a plumber or an electrician or what have you. It's not just that you could be a plumber or an electrician. You can set up your own business and employ other plumbers and electricians, and you can expand that way. There's not just one way of setting yourself up.
Yeah, that's true. But of course, not everybody can be a business owner. We just have to make that clear that a small percentage of people can do that.
Yeah, some people are going to fail. Most businesses fail. That's a fact. Small businesses. And of course, with the recent lockdowns, we've had all those extra problems because of that. But I still think that, people, too many people go to university in UK. Just too many people go. People go to university who never should. And they don't really get anything out of it. And basically, they're getting themselves in debt for no great reason.
Yeah, but what if it's the case that even if these sort of mediocre white-collar jobs, like, literally just require a degree, then you're kind of stuck with doing that.
Maybe, but maybe, this is what we're saying. I think is that there are options to mediocre white-collar jobs. You don't have to do that. It might even not be the Chad thing to do, if you will pardon the expression. I know certainly in Australia, the tradie is this icon. He's usually very confident. He's usually got quite a lot of money to spend if he wants to. Most of them are doing okay in terms of where they live, this kind of stuff. It's by no means a bad choice for many people.
Yeah, but one of the criticisms that I've heard from people that I know on Twitter is that basically, actually, it's not very easy to get into the trades. You either have to have like a family member that's already in it that can sort of take you in, or you have to go on like an apprenticeship scheme with British
Yeah.
Gas or something like that. So
Yeah.
it's not. You know, there have been arguments put forward that it's not all it's cracked up to be. Like it's not a walk in the park.
No, and it never has been. I mean, you always had to do an apprenticeship, which basically means you do every shit job that the bloke you're learning from wants you to do, but you're also learning at the same time. And that died out a bit. The apprenticeships, there were fewer and fewer for a long time, although the government's been trying to bring them back in Australia and in UK to some degree. But we're not after easy options, are we? I mean, surely if we're going to be traditionalists and we're going to be the sort of people we are on the right, we're not after an easy walk in the park. What we're after is like where you can work hard and succeed.
I'm not sure that I agree with that. I mean, if my view would be like I would want to take the path of least resistance and give myself an easy shot at life. I don't want to make life unnecessarily hard.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I mean, there's no such thing as free lunch. Everything's got swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, for sure. But at the same time, it's like I personally would not pick my career based on its like physical credentials, like, oh, being a tradesman is trad and cool, therefore I will become a tradesman. It's like that's not the way that I would view it. But then again, admittedly, I think I do have a pretty materialist view of life. So I mean, maybe people who have got more of a metaphysical sort of like outlook would.
I just think, some poor bugger working in a call center, there are better things he could do. I'm not suggesting that someone who does what you do, whatever that is, and I know it's something you've totally worked for yourself for, but someone who hasn't got that ability for one reason or another, there are better things they can do than working in a bloody call center, or being an admin person in the NHS or something like that.
Yeah, but it's not like like being an admin worker in the NHS. That might be like someone's got to do that job.
Yeah, but that need not concern us. Do you see what I mean? I mean, I'll be quite happy if the NHS collapsed, frankly, as long as it does it gradually enough that loads of people don't die.
I don't know if
I'm not a support. I'm not. What I mean is, I'm not a supporter of the NHS. I'd like to see it got rid of and be replaced by something else.
Yeah, but if you took that view, you would say that's like saying, "Oh, no right-wing people should become doctors because we don't believe in the NHS." It's like, yeah, but that might be the case, but that's still not a reason not to be a doctor.
No. Listen, my thing with the NHS is that it is enormously bloated with admin people rather than doctors and nurses. I think doctors and nurses are a totally different thing. Do you see the difference? I'm not suggesting people shouldn't become doctors or nurses. I'm suggesting people shouldn't become admin guys for the NHS.
Well, I don't know if being a sort of useless admin guy still pays a good wage. I mean, why not? If you're literally just going to be pushing paper around and doing sod all, I mean, from an individual point of view, I mean, like, why not take that job?
Well, if that's what you want to do, if that's what you want to do, I suppose, yeah. But it's pretty, it's a bit like poverty of imagination again that we were talking about earlier, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, that is an incredibly cynical view, but I mean, some people might want that. Yeah, it's like we'll just take the NHS for a ride.
Yeah, and some people want to do a little safe job somewhere and what have you. Yeah, I'm not against any. I'm not saying don't do that necessarily, but personally, I don't think that's something to aspire to. Being a paper pusher in the NHS would not be something that I would aspire to. because the doctors and nurses don't even like you, really, you know.
Yeah, well, I think the main thing is like aspire to be. My advice would be to aspire to be the best that you can be in whatever it is that you can do. You know, in your passion or whatever gift that you've got. You know, definitely strive to be the best that you can be. Don't sell yourself short. And for some people, that may be working in admin for the NHS.
Yeah, I dare say it might be. I mean, I don't think that there's going to be huge numbers of those people listening to like a stream like this, but maybe. I just think, you know, I'm particularly concerned with young men, particularly because I think they're getting, particularly young white men in Britain are getting, and Australia also to a lesser degree, are getting a pretty raw deal these days in terms of the openings that are available to them. They're kind of at the bottom of the heap. And that's one reason why, you know, I think we need to try and give them some advice. I know there's that Albion group that have made a few YouTube videos, and certainly those guys, and they talk about investments and they talk about all sorts of different things. And even those guys were saying that, you know, a trade is not something to be sniffed at if that's the way your kind of skill set and mind goes. If that makes any sense. Royal, you're a very young chap. I think you're the youngest of the three of us that are still here. What's your view on this stuff?
Well, I don't know. I mean, people give all sorts of advice, don't they? I don't know. Follow. If you want to make money, then do that. If you feel drawn to do something, then do that. Just like, I don't know, whatever. I don't know. I don't want to be giving people advice, but I just do what you know what I'm drawn to at the end of the day. But I mean,
yeah, that's pretty much what we were saying.
Maybe that's terrible advice, but maybe you should just do what makes you funny. But
well, it's pretty much what we were saying. And I mean, you know, some people are not going to do stuff for money. I mean, I joined the army. I certainly didn't join the army to make great money. I mean, I can look back on that now and say that was probably a mistake, but you know, it just wasn't what I was mostly interested in at that time.
Well, I mean, you're only on Earth for 80 years or something. I don't mean to get too deep here, but you're only on Earth for that long, and I mean, gotta pick something that's worthwhile, I suppose. But that's my view.
Well, for you, I mean, I agree with Sojo to the extent that you've got to pick something that's good for you, and people are different. So, you know, okay, there are going to be people that aspiring to be a paper pusher somewhere is probably all they're ever going to be able to do. So I guess go do that. But there's other people who will want to do something more adventurous or will want to do something that challenges them more. I'm going to do that, you know. And there are those people who want to be independent. They'll want to be self-employed in some way or what have you. Like when I wasn't, apart from being in the army, I've been self-employed for most of my life, just because I don't like bosses very much.
Do you not think it's in the nature of people who are conservative to actually just want like non-risky, boring jobs? Because they're conservative by their very nature. So they're actually not really going to push the boat out, not going to take great risks. I mean, that's a gross oversimplification of the situation. But I think I kind of get that vibe. Like people who sort of want to return to tradition and just like, I'll just live in my cottage and in the Shire. There is that kind of. I mean, there really is a lack of ambition and sort of like.
There is that strand for sure.
Looking.
Yeah, there is that strand. I don't think it's the only strand, but it's certainly one. I mean, I think that's one reason why you get these guys who are like pretty communist in many respects, who claim to be nationalists, and they just want everything like regulated to death, which is certainly not my position. And I think that comes from that place partly, you know, just safety. No risk. But I think it's one strand. I don't think it's the only one by any means. And I mean, if you look back on the great men in history, or the great British men in history, for example, I think many of them were more or less reactionaries. you know, you eat great adventurers. I mean, people like Cook and Drake and people like that. I mean, those guys were basically reactionaries in most respects.
You know what's interesting? Can you think of any great industrialists or capitalist business magnates that were certifiably right wing? Because my impression is that, you know, when you go back to the Victorian era and, you know, think about sort of reading Carlyle and, you know, the factory owners are sort of whinging, complaining about sort of, you know, like slave rights in the Caribbean. And that's a distinctly kind of left-wing view, isn't it, really? That, you know, I get the impression that a lot of these industrialists were probably just like left-wing liberals.
Yeah. Yeah, they wouldn't be left wing by our modern standards, but by the time, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would say that most business owners these days are basically left wing, or they purport to be left wing. They have sort of publicly left wing values. So it's just interesting because in an age where, you know, commerce and merchants and finance dominates, you know, that's really, you know, business and you know, being a merchant is where the power rests. And if sort of left wing personalities are drawn to those areas to be successful, as opposed to like military commanders who probably would be more sort of right wing, but are functionaries of the state rather than of capital and finance, then we are naturally at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I mean, the average industrialist, the medium-sized business owners, they were kind of Gladstone's constituency in the 19th century. So yeah, they were liberals. They were liberals, absolutely. Yeah.
Someone's brought up Henry Ford. I mean, Henry Ford, I think, was fairly right wing.
America.
Americans.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I'm not too familiar with like the politics of people like Brunel. I'm not sure how his politics.
Ford was American and also a bit later than we're really talking about here. Cecil Rhodes kind of, but he wasn't really an industrialist.
He was a liberal as well.
Rhodes wasn't a liberal. No, he wasn't.
Well, he was a member of the Liberal Party.
Yeah, but he wasn't a liberal in any real sense. Honestly, he wasn't. He was definitely what would become the liberal imperialists who would join the conservatives eventually.
Okay, all right. He supported Irish Home Rule though as well. But.
Well, I think I would have supported. I would have probably supported Irish Home Rule back in the day because I think it would have kept Ireland attached to Britain if they could have found a way to do it.
Well,
so back in the day, I probably would have supported it. It's the one Gladstone policy that I don't think was totally wrong, and I detest Gladstone. I really don't like him at all. But I think that Britain did need to do something with Ireland, and the fact that we didn't, or the fact that Gladstone didn't, in fact, is the real reason that the break came. So I'm not totally centre of the line conservative on that one, but I would say that most of your northern and Midlands industrialists and people who own chains of shops, and they were Gladstone's constituency, and they absolutely were liberals. Yeah, although they would have been right-wing liberals by today's standards, of course. Because everything has just gone left. I mean, you know, they would have probably been more right-wing than Boris Johnson is now, you know. In fact, they certainly would have been more right-wing than Boris Johnson is now. But yeah, so, you know, that's how far things have just drifted left. But again, you know, if we're going to talk about this riding the tiger stuff and take it back to what we were really talking about, I think that it's much more useful to give young men advice on like the sorts of careers they could do and stuff like that than to talk about saying, oh yeah, well, go and ride the tiger, boys, you know.
Well, let's not. I mean, we're putting words into this guy's mouth. We're putting words into AA's mouth. This stream is upcoming. Is that right, or it has been?
No,
I think it's on now. I think
he's done one and he's doing another.
Yeah, I think it's not really fair for us to. I mean, I certainly can't pass any judgment because I haven't watched the guy for, I don't know, probably since December. Actually, really, like going on for 3 months. months.
He's made that his big. Riding the Tiger has been his big deal since he abandoned the Trump train.
I think he's doing a stream today called the Crimes of Patriotism or something weird.
Yeah, but wasn't that put back because he wanted
Might put it
that?
back.
He wanted that very young chap Turnip on there, and apparently Turnip can't do it. So, and I mean Turnip's a very young chap. He makes you look quite mature, or like. I mean, I like him. I think Turnip's a very intelligent young American chap, but I'm not sure why it's necessary to have him on a stream about patriotism. And also, it's going to make it inevitably very American based. This is my other bit of a criticism with AA. Is a lot of his stuff is very US based these days.
Well, of course it is. It's his primary income now. I mean,
absolutely.
What do you expect?
Yeah, it's true. That's true. I do agree with that.
Money talks and bullshit walks.
True.
But
Patriotic Archive in the chat. And by the way, Patriotic Archive, I've been following your recent videos and I like them. Is asking advice for average working class lads with no notable skills.
Fucked, aren't you really?
I was just going to say that we were talking earlier about working on oil rigs and mines and this kind of stuff. I think those sorts of chaps could certainly look at that sort of thing.
How would you even get into that? How would an average working class guy get into that? That is.
Well, the internet is a wonderful thing and would probably give you some advice to start with. But, I mean, if I was a young chap and I wanted to get into that's the first thing I would be looking at. And then you'd have to be pretty flexible about where you went and what you did, certainly to start with.
Oh, you'd have to take whatever you could get.
Yeah, absolutely. Just get your foot in the door.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you can do that, then, from there you can move on to something else that might be better or better paid or what have you. But, I mean, that's certainly one thing that I would be looking. If I was a fit young bloke with no particular skills, that would be one thing that I would be looking at for sure is things like mines and oil rigs. And I would absolutely be willing to move out of the UK for a while.
Here's the thing, though, is that, even the proposition of the question, like an average working class guy with no notable skills, is that person even going to have the wherewithal to even sort of explore those ideas? I don't think that kind of.
Some of them will.
Yeah, but if you've actually got the foresight to think about being able to work on an oil rig or as a roughneck or whatever, then would you even? I mean, I suppose it's possible that life circumstances put you in an awful position, and you're a capable, talented person, at the age of 18, and things haven't gone right for you. But at that age, you've still got time to go and grab some A levels and get off to university.
You could do that. I mean, another idea that I would put forward to chaps like that, and I did this myself when I was in my bloody 40s, was go and work on a trawler or something like that.
Well, very dangerous profession.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not safe at all. But I'm not talking about safety. I'm talking about things that you might do. And I mean, if I'd have been a younger chap and gone and done that at say 18 or 20 or even 25, you could, if you worked hard enough, you could eventually end up being a trawler skipper. Perfectly possible. So that's another thing you could go and look at. I mean, I got myself a job as a first mate on a sailing boat when I was in my 40s because I'd done sailing in the past, and I'd worked for like marine pilots and people like that. Yeah, and then just because my life fell apart for various reasons, because my late woman died, I thought stuff this, and I went and worked on East Coast pawn trawlers out of Cairns in Australia. Yeah. And that was just a case of going around boats and finding someone who needed a crew.
Yeah, those kind of I tell you what, there is kind of an allure to those kind of jobs in the sense that they're dangerous.
Yeah, and they're not terribly paid, by the way, even when you start.
I mean, there's a trade-off. So they're dangerous, but you're working with blokes. Like there's that camaraderie that you can have.
Yep.
But also, if you think about if you want to like start a family, I mean, let's be honest. If you're going to be like a roughneck, or you're going to be working in the mines in Perth, 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, your marriage is probably, if you're in a relationship, if you've got a family, if you're in a marriage, it's probably going to fucking end in disaster. Excuse my language.
Yeah, I mean, look. I think you've got to use that as a setup period before you get yourself into a relationship.
Yeah.
But what you've got to do is you've got to use that to get some money behind you.
Yeah.
And
So Puffwagon in the chat said his son's just finished fracking in the USA. He worked for 3 months, was on $1,500 a week. He's only 22.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
But that can set you up. That sort of cash,
Seed
particularly, yeah, it's seed money to do something else. It can set you. It can set you up to put yourself in a better position to do something else if you want to.
And it's
Yeah.
it's probably exciting for a young person to go off
Yeah.
and do that. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
literally kind of like the Wild West of that's left of the world. That kind of work.
Yeah. I remember watching a bloody British TV play or film or whatever you in the 1970s, and it was about a guy from London who went up to the north of Scotland and got a job on a fishing boat, and all the shit he went through from all the Scotsmen and all the rest of it, until eventually he was accepted. It was bloody hard work and really difficult, but he managed it in the end, and it was based on a true story. It was based on someone's life story, and you can do that stuff, but you've got to think outside the box. And as you say, you've got to, like, you're exchanging risk. I mean, I joined the army, and an average working class bloke could join the army, and if they're willing to do their 22 years or whatever it is, they might finish up a company sergeant major or whatever at the end of it, which is a pretty reasonable job with a pretty reasonable pension.
Speaking of the army, when can you actually start drawing a full pension? It's much younger than.
Yeah, but it's 50. Yeah, it's 55 or something. I think 55 is pretty much that's the end of your line in the military these days.
55. So
yeah, it's about 55. Yeah.
It's not. I mean, it's not too bad.
And if you finish up as a senior NCO, which if you keep your nose clean and you're not a total idiot, you've got every chance of doing, if you don't get killed, of course, which is always the disadvantage. But if you don't get killed and you keep your nose clean and you finish up a senior NCO, like I say, you're at WO2 or certainly at WO1, you end up with a pretty damn good pension at the end of that. And the salary in the senior ranks is not that terrible either these days.
Also, what about, I mean, like being a private contractor, like say in Iraq, like you finish your tour of duty and you come out of the army or whatever in the Navy, and then you got these like BlackRock, these private contractors. I mean, you can make a lot of money.
Yep, you can. Again, increase risk and less backup than you would have with an actual force. But yeah, you can absolutely do that.
Yeah, I think there were some American guys who were on $250,000 a year.
And loads of British guys do it too. There's plenty of like ex-military British blokes who go and do exactly the same thing. Yeah, and if they've done a certain amount of time, if they've done like 12 years or something, they'll still end up with some sort of British military pension as well. It won't be as much, but they will still end up with some. So again, that's a perfectly good option for someone who's got no qualifications. I mean, you'll get the objection from certain elements of nationalism that you shouldn't go and support the state and all the rest of it. But if we're talking about actual jobs that people can go and do, I mean, my son's in the Navy, and he's already been to like about 8 countries, I think. And he's shortly speaking going to be on HMS Queen Elizabeth when she goes through the Mediterranean, through the Indian Ocean, and ends up in the South China Sea, and then comes to Australia. So again, compensation. You're going to see all these different places. You're going to make mates that you'll probably keep for life.
Good mateship. Yeah, I would imagine that that's one thing that you one of the benefits is that once you've been in a, I don't know, I'm just sort of spitballing here, but if you've ever been in a combat situation with a bunch of blokes, that I would imagine that those of you who come out of it will always be friends for the rest of your lives.
Well, providing you're not the one who lets other people down, but yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you do make very close mates.
Yeah.
Like if you're in the infantry, your section of like 8 guys are kind of like your brothers, And when you are fighting, you're fighting for them as much as anything else, you know. So I mean, there are far worse things you could do for that. And I've got many criticisms of the modern military in Britain and other Western nations, but if you're the average working class bloke with no particular skills that Patriotic Archive was talking about, that's certainly another option for you. I mean, it's a bit like we were saying with the trawler guys. You know, you're making a bit of a gamble here, because what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to do something dangerous and sometimes very bloody hard in return for being able to get out of where I am now, you know, and into a much better position.
Yeah.
You know, once you can get yourself to, say, sergeant at least, I mean, corporals are not so bad, but once you get the sergeant, that's a pretty responsible, reasonable job. And you're on a not terrible salary, and you're going to end up with a reasonable pension much earlier, as Sojo said, than most people will get a pension. And in fact, I don't think most people are going to get a state pension at all in a few years.
So just think, so if you join the army and you're on, I don't know what they earn, 16, 18 grand a year, or whatever.
I'm not sure what it is now, mate. I'm not sure what it is now. I remember when I joined, it was like it was about 90 quid a week, which wasn't terrible when I joined.
But the thing is that, so you go into the army, but do you have to pay for accommodation? Or is that paid for?
No, but basically your accommodation, and when you're on operations, your food is mostly paid for.
Right. So when you're in, what kind of expenses do you actually have? So it's like, of that money that you earn, how much of that are you able to bank each month?
Well, it depends how stingy you are and how willing not to go to the pubs on the weekends and that kind of stuff. But if you wanted to, quite a lot. And of course, it also depends where you're posted. You know, if you're posted in Afghanistan, there was not a hell of a lot to spend your money on. You know.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were posted in Germany or Hong Kong in the old days, there was loads of stuff to spend your money on if you wanted to. You know. So it depends.
But also, if you're in Afghanistan, you actually get a top up, don't you? Because you're in.
You get a little bit extra. Yeah, you would have got extra, for sure. It's as I say, if you're a bloke with no particular skills, average working class guy, it's by no means the worst choice you could make. And if you keep your nose clean and you're not a total idiot, and so can get promotion. And also, don't forget, you're going to have to pass tests and stuff to get those promotions. You can't be a total moron and do that anymore. That's totally not possible. But you can get ahead and get yourself into a kind of reasonable middle-class salary type grade.
And what kind of, I mean, are there any kind of like training options? Like, can you?
Yeah, you all sorts of things.
Will they put you through like electrician's course and shit like that for like the Royal Auxiliary or whatever, Royal Engineers, that kind of thing?
Yeah, there's loads of stuff like that where you can get trades. And the army in the old days, the army did things differently to civilians. They don't anymore. So that a trade you learn in the army will now be recognised when you leave.
Yeah, that makes sense that it's fungible. Yeah. You've got sort of transferable skills. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. That does.
And like if you're going to be an officer, yes, they will put you through university and that kind of stuff. Yes, they will. But you have to be an officer for that one. And also, don't forget, these days, if you're bright, there is a chance you might even get a commission. It's not impossible to get a commission in the British Army these days if you join as a private. By no means impossible.
And what does it mean to be commissioned?
It means you're a commissioned officer. You become a second lieutenant.
But what does that mean for normies like me? Like, that doesn't mean anything to me.
Well, there's a difference between officers and men. Yeah, like the officers are the chaps who run everything. They're the line managers, this kind of stuff. Yeah. Does that make sense to you?
Not really. What does it? Why would I want to be a commissioned officer?
All right. So if you're a second lieutenant, for example, you're the most dangerous thing in the British Army when you've got a map. And what it means is you're in charge of a platoon of 30 blokes, and helping you as your number two will be an experienced sergeant, who's probably been in the army at least 10, 12 years. Yeah. And he will be your main advisor, but you're actually in charge. You as the young second lieutenant just out of uni. And Sandhurst.
Right. Okay. Right. Okay.
Yeah, and then you become a lieutenant, then you become a captain. Once you become a captain, or more frequently these days, a major, you might be a company commander in charge of 100 guys, roughly.
Right.
You know, and then you become a major. Then you become a lieutenant colonel, and if you're bloody good, because a lot of army officers don't go beyond major. But if you're bloody good, you become a lieutenant colonel, and you're in charge of a whole battalion of maybe 600 guys.
Right. Yeah.
So the officers are the guys who actually run the military. Like, actually, it's not true. The NCOs run it, but the officers are the guys in charge. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So, like,
a pretty good crash course in the structure of the UK Army.
Yeah, you could kind of think of the officers as like the management, and you could think of the NCOs as the foreman and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be kind of very, very basic way to look at it, but it's a bit more complicated than that. But yeah. So, it's not impossible for a bright bloke to go from private to being commissioned these days. It does happen, but you certainly don't need to do that to end up with a worthwhile career. And at the end of it, to put yourself in a financially not terrible position, providing you don't get killed or have your legs blown off. You know, but
the golden caveat there, don't get killed.
Well, it's like we were saying about working on oil rigs or in mines or working on trawlers. If you're going to go into your working life with no qualifications at all, you're going to have to make some trade-offs.
Yeah.
If you want to get ahead, but there are things you can do that can do that if you're willing to take the risk, and you do get the compensation of excitement and adventure and comradeship and all that stuff, which are not to be totally poo-pooed compared to shuffling papers around or working in a call center.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if there's anything that's you're certainly going to get more of a chance of a transcendent experience, in a sort of dangerous situation like that, than you're ever going to get sitting behind a desk programming or doing architecting like I do. So, it's
I think it was
not to be sniffed at. Yeah.
I think it was Dr. Johnson who turned around and said, everyone, and this was like obviously 18th century Britain, and he said everyone thinks less of himself for never having been a soldier or a sailor.
Yeah.
Meaning a Royal Navy sailor, So even back then there was that kind of thing, and Dr. Johnson, who was no damned idiot, certainly recognized it. Now, Cardamom, a second lieutenant, and it's pronounced lieutenant with an F in the British Army, is a British rank, and it's the most dangerous thing in the army when he's got a map. The cornet has not been a rank in the British Army for a very, very long time. Back in the 19th century, a cornet was the lowest ranking cavalry officer there was, and the infantry equivalent would have been an ensign. But these days, when you leave Sandhurst, you become a second lieutenant, which is the lowest ranking British Army officer, and the most dangerous thing in the British Army when he's armed with a map, because he constantly gets lost. And, sensible second lieutenants lean heavily on their platoon sergeant, who's an experienced NCO and knows what's what. And that's how they learn. But yeah, I mean, I think, we've come up with some ideas for like all sorts of bloody people here. And if you've ended up leaving school and you're 19 or 20, you could certainly do worse than joining the British Army or the Royal Marines or the Royal Navy, or the Air Force even, if that's the way you are. I mean, I've got a mate who's in the RAF regiment, and he's currently serving in Cyprus on a 6-month tour. So, and having a nice time. He's enjoying it. It's not the world's worst post.
There's no lockdown in Cyprus, and the weather's pretty good, so I can think of worse places to be this in 2021.
And he's telling me there are plenty of dark-eyed Mediterranean beauties and all this kind of stuff. He's a much younger chap than me, by the way. So yeah, it's got its compensations,
Cracking stuff.
So, have we got anything to wind this up with, guys? I'm going to ask Rawlake first because we haven't heard from you for a bit.
I don't know what people should do with their lives.
Well, I think, listen, we're not telling anyone what to do with their lives. We're just laying out a few options, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's good.
We're just laying out options for different people, and it's as Sojo was saying, it's horses for courses. You know, if you're
Yeah.
if you're a highly intelligent bloke and you've got loads of qualifications, then your choices are probably going to be different from someone who has hated school and left school with no qualifications. But you've got to give options to people of both of those and everyone in between, which is most people, obviously. And I just think you've got to give guys hope, and particularly young native British guys these days, who, as I said before, are basically at the bottom of the heap in terms of opportunities.
Mm.
But there are opportunities out there. You just got to think a bit outside the box.
Yeah.
Anything, Sergio? Finish up with on that one?
No, mate. Let's wrap this up because my ears are really hurting. These headphones are not very comfortable.
Yeah, no, same. All right, guys, I'll just say before we close, this was not my standard stream. This was an extra one, which I've been threatening for weeks and finally got done. I am going to do an old Commonwealth stream, but like our resident Australian, it was his anniversary. And so he couldn't do that because obviously he had to be with his missus, and you can't blame him for that. So we will be doing another old Commonwealth stream, and on Saturday evening I'll be doing my usual Splendid Isolation stream, and people will be welcome to come for that. Thanks for coming on, Royal Oak. Thanks, Sojo. Thanks, Right Honourable Limbu. And we'll see you next time.
Yep. Cheers, Duke. Thanks.
Sure.